He had been drifting in and out of consciousness for days. I'd gotten used to the sounds of the monitors, the slow hiss of oxygen, the beeping rhythm that told me he was still here. But that night something shifted. He stirred slightly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. His hand moved beneath the blanket and his lips parted. I leaned in instinctively, thinking he might need water or pain medication. Maybe he was waking up enough to speak. And then he did. Soft. Fragile. Barely a whisper. Emily. That wasn't my name. I froze. My entire body went still. Emily. It came out like something familiar, like a name he'd said 1,000 times before. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't confused. It was effortless, like it belonged to him. I stared at him, unable to breathe. We'd been married for 17 years. We'd built a quiet, ordinary life together. 2 kids. A mortgage. Sunday morning pancakes. Arguments about laundry. Laughter in the kitchen. I thought I knew everything there was to know about this man. And yet, Emily. He didn't open his eyes after saying it. He just sank back into sleep, face relaxed, unaware he had just shattered something. I stood there for minutes, listening to the silence return, trying to tell myself it meant nothing. Maybe he was dreaming of a character from a movie. Maybe it was a nurse from his childhood. Maybe. But I knew better. Deep down I always had. There had been signs. Missed calls. Shorter hugs. His phone always face down. A receipt from a restaurant I'd never been to, crumpled in his coat pocket. And that perfume, unfamiliar, lingering on his jacket like a whisper someone else had left behind. I'd made excuses. I'd convinced myself I was paranoid. That he was tired. That we were just older. But hearing her name, not mine, broke something I didn't know was still fragile. I sat down slowly in the chair beside his bed. The same chair I'd spent so many nights in, holding his hand, praying he'd make it. Now I didn't know what I was praying for. Not rage. Not even pain. Just clarity. There are moments in life that don't need answers. Just truth. And that was mine. A name dropped in the middle of the night, revealing everything I hadn't wanted to see. I didn't shake him awake. I didn't cry. I just watched him, wondering how many times he had said her name when I wasn't listening. If you've ever had a moment like that, one word, one detail that changed everything, you'll understand this silence. Some betrayals don't need confrontation. They just stay with you, quiet but permanent. I still loved him. Or maybe I just loved the idea of us. But from that moment on, everything changed. The next morning I went home to get some of his things. Pajamas. Books. His favorite blanket. But I also opened drawers I'd never dared to open before. And in one of them I found something I wasn't ready for. The house felt different when I walked in. Not because anything had changed. Everything was still where it had always been. His shoes by the door. His coffee mug on the table. His coat hanging on the back of the chair. But it felt like a stranger had lived here. Or maybe it was me who had become the stranger. I wasn't there to snoop. At least that's what I told myself. I was just grabbing what he needed from the hospital. Pajamas, his favorite sweater. The book he always read before bed. The blanket our daughter gave him last Christmas. But when I opened the dresser drawer, I saw it. Not right away. It was tucked underneath some folded t-shirts, almost as if hidden, but not quite. A small shopping bag from a boutique I didn't recognize. Inside a box. Elegant, matte black, tied with a cream ribbon. I opened it. Perfume. Not mine. The moment I lifted the bottle, I knew. I had smelled it before. On his collar once, faint but undeniable. I had ignored it, told myself it must have come from someone at work or a cashier or an elevator. I sprayed it lightly into the air. It filled the room like a ghost. Soft. Sweet. Expensive. It smelled like someone who knew her worth. And suddenly the memory came back sharp, clear. He'd walked in late one night 2 months ago. I'd kissed him out of habit, and I'd smelled it. Just for a second. I'd asked if he'd stop somewhere. He said no. He looked away too quickly. I didn't press him. I should have. The bottle wasn't new. She'd been wearing it for a while. I put it down, my fingers trembling. That's when I noticed the envelope beneath the box. It was a receipt. From a hotel. Not in our city. Not even in our state. A weekend charge, full rate, 2 nights. 2 breakfasts. Room for 2. I checked the date. It was the weekend he had taken a business trip. The one I had packed a suitcase for. The one I had kissed him goodbye at the airport for. He had called me from that hotel room. Told me he missed me. Asked how the kids were. Said he was tired from meetings. I had believed every word. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the receipt. And for the first time I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't feel rage. I felt empty. There's a kind of betrayal that hollows you out, not because it surprises you, but because it confirms everything you've already buried. I folded the receipt carefully and put it back in the envelope. I placed the perfume back in the box, tied the ribbon again, and slid everything exactly where I'd found it. Let it stay there. Let it rot in silence. I packed his things. Slowly. With intention. I even ironed his pajamas before folding them. Not because he deserved it, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could still do things with care. Even now, back at the hospital, he was sleeping. I placed the bag of clothes beside his bed and sat down in the same chair as before. He stirred slightly, his hand moving toward mine. I didn't take it. Not anymore. I had heard her name. I had found her scent. I had seen her room. Now I just had to decide how much longer I'd pretend he was still mine. The room was dim when he opened his eyes. I had just come back with a coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. The hallway was quiet, the nurse had adjusted his and for a brief moment everything felt manageable. Almost still. Then he stirred. His eyes fluttered open slowly, like someone waking from a long heavy dream. He blinked twice, his lips dry, and I leaned forward slightly expecting something. Maybe confusion or gratitude or even my name. But what he said was, "Is Emily here?" 4 words. That was it. Not hi. Not what time is it. Not even where am I. He asked for her. He didn't even realize what he had done. He didn't flinch. He didn't correct himself. He just kept looking past me, as if she might walk in at any moment. I didn't answer. I sat back slowly, letting his question hang in the air between us like smoke, letting it twist around the beeping monitors and the steady rhythm of his oxygen line. He must have seen something change in my face because a moment later he blinked again. Slower this time and said, "Wait, what did I say?" I didn't respond to that either, because the answer was obvious, and he knew it. He looked away then back again. I didn't mean anything by it. I think I was dreaming. Dreaming. The same excuse people use for things they absolutely meant. I picked up my coffee, still warm in my hand, and stood. "I'm going to step out for a while," I said quietly. He nodded, almost relieved. I walked into the hallway, closed the door gently behind me, and leaned against the wall. My fingers gripped the cup tighter than necessary. I stared at the floor, trying to slow my breathing. Not because I was angry, not anymore. I was done being angry. I was just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of guessing. Tired of loving someone who thought of someone else when he was closest to death. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with my hands folded. I stared at the phone, wondering if I should call her. Ask her if she knew he had asked for her. If she knew he was dying and still believed she was the last voice he wanted to hear. But I didn't call. Instead, I opened my drawer and pulled out the folder with our healthcare directives. Things we had filled out together years ago, never imagining we'd need them so soon. His signature was still there. So was mine. There was a box to check, whether to allow resuscitation if his heart stopped. Whether to keep him alive on machines. I stared at it for a long time. Then I checked the box. Do not resuscitate. Not out of cruelty. Not even out of revenge. But because some things don't need to be prolonged. Especially lies. I returned to the hospital that evening. He was asleep again. Peaceful. As if the day hadn't happened. As if Emily had never been spoken. I sat beside him, folded his blanket over his chest, and turned the chair slightly, not facing him anymore. That night, when the nurse asked if I needed anything, I said no. But what I really meant was, I no longer need to be lied to. I thought maybe she wouldn't come. That she'd stay away. Out of respect. Out of shame. Or maybe out of fear that I'd confront her. Say the things I never got to say to him. But she came. And she wore white. Not the kind of white someone wears to mourn. Not subtle. Not muted. It was crisp, deliberate. The kind that stands out like a headline in a silent room. She walked slowly between the rows of folding chairs, holding a small bouquet of white roses. People turned. They didn't know who she was, but I did. She sat in the second row. Not the front, of course. That was mine. But just close enough to be seen. Close enough that her presence would press itself against the back of my neck like a shadow. I didn't turn around. The ceremony was short. Quiet. Just like him, I suppose. A man of few words, most of which, it turns out, meant less than I thought. The casket was closed. At my request. There were no photos. No video montage. No music. I didn't want sentimentality. I wanted silence. I wanted space. I wanted to remember him the way I needed to, not the way others thought I should. When the officiant asked if anyone wanted to speak, I stood. I hadn't planned to. I hadn't written anything down. But something in me said, say something true. I walked up to the podium, took a breath, looked out at the faces of people who thought they knew us. He was my husband for 17 years, I began. And for many of them, I was proud to say that. A pause. There are things I could say today about who he was, what he gave, how he lived. But what matters most to me is what he left behind. And sometimes what someone leaves is silence. I didn't look at her. But I could feel her stillness behind me. There are people here today who didn't know they were part of his story. And people who thought they were but weren't. That's how life goes sometimes. That's how love fades. Not with a scream. But with a name spoken in sleep that isn't yours. I closed my notes. There weren't any. Just the folded paper in my pocket with the name he whispered before he died. I didn't cry. I walked back to my seat, sat down, and let the ceremony continue. After the burial, people began to leave. Quiet condolences. A few hands on my shoulder. The usual. Then she came toward me. Can I speak to you? She asked low. I looked at her. Close, she looked younger. Polished. Soft. I didn't expect you'd be here, I said. I didn't come for drama. I nodded. Then don't make any. She hesitated. Her eyes moved to the casket. He loved you, you know. No, I said. He loved the version of me that never knew. She didn't reply. Just nodded and walked away. And I watched her go. A stranger walking out of a story she never should have been in. I stayed a little longer. Alone. The wind picked up. A few petals from the funeral flowers blew across the grass. I bent down and picked up one. White. Of course. Then I turned toward the grave. And I knew exactly what I was going to have carved into the stone. I returned alone, 5 days after the funeral. The sky was overcast, the wind sharp. The cemetery was nearly empty. Just rows of quiet names etched into cold stone. But not his. Not yet. The temporary marker still stood. A wooden cross with a typed name and the wrong dates. I hated it. I hated how impersonal it looked, like someone forgotten in a system. But part of me knew it was fitting. He had left without explanation. Without apology. Without choosing who he truly belonged to. I brought the stone myself. A simple slab of gray granite, hand-delivered by the man from the monument shop. He had called me twice to confirm the engraving. Thought maybe I had made a mistake. No name, he'd asked gently. No, I said. No name. Just 6 words etched into the center. He left without saying everything. No birth date. No final message. Just that. I stood there for a long time reading it over and over again, even though I'd written it myself. Behind me, someone walked past. A man and his dog. Neither of them noticed me. I knelt down and placed a bundle of dried lavender at the base of the stone. Not roses. Not lilies. Not anything too romantic. Lavender fades slowly. It leaves its scent even when it's gone. Like her perfume. I thought about Emily. I hadn't seen her since the funeral. She hadn't reached out. And I hadn't looked for her. Some people don't deserve a second chapter. They barely belonged in the first. I sat on the bench nearby and watched the wind move through the trees. And I remembered something I had nearly forgotten. Years ago, before our first child was born, he had asked what I wanted my legacy to be. I'd laughed. Said, to be the one no one ever had to doubt. He had smiled and said, "Then that's exactly what you'll be." But he didn't keep his word. I never got a final apology, not even a last look. In the end he faded, not like a storm but like a shadow, slow and silent. And now here I was, his wife on paper, a ghost in his story, but not in mine. I stood up slowly, brushing dust from my coat. The wind picked up again, colder this time. The granite was smooth beneath my fingertips. Cold. Permanent. I whispered one final thing before leaving. Not to him, but to myself. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes silence is the loudest choice. And I walked away. If you've ever had to carry a goodbye that never really arrived, if you've ever chosen silence over rage, you're not alone. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all. Tell me in the comments, what would you have written on his grave? And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who still thinks silence means weakness. Doesn't.